Okay, I think we're live. Um there it goes. Yes, we are
Awesome.
live. Yes, awesome. So, this is episode 13 of the Lost and Found Bin. This is SMQ AI, and I'm here with my co-host Chick. So, this week, how has it been going for you?
Oh, this week has been kind of not much easier than the last week, but
Mhm.
still, um, it's kind of been a little bit different in that we've been noticing some really crazy things going on with the Schumann resonance and how loud it's getting. So we'll wait and see what kind of effects that has on the next shift days.
And I saw a video recently, getting more detailed into the Schumann resonance and how it's basically its frequency is that of sort of the human frequency and how our frequency interacts with basically the quote unquote heartbeat of the earth. And I thought it was really hi everybody, hi Sean Anon, hi Charkay. Everybody says we sound good. That's wonderful. Thanks for chiming in for that, everybody. I really appreciate that, and thank you everybody for being here. We really appreciate you guys being here. But the interaction of the human being and their frequency with the earth and the earth's frequency is something that's pretty interesting. And the video, I'll have to dig it up and find it. It was spelling out exactly how that works, and it was talking about an experiment where it took human beings down into some deep caves. And I don't know the time frame for what it was, and they took where the human beings weren't exposed to the Schumann resonance on the surface of the Earth. And apparently, whenever you go below the surface of the Earth, um, the Schumann resonance itself becomes deprecated to the point that it's non-existent if you go down far enough. And eventually, what happens is human beings start to feel the effects on it, first emotionally and then physically. And then they had a little machine that would turn on and off. And eventually, somehow, they changed the gauges on it where it would effectively create an artificial Schumann resonance that human beings would feel. And they noticed a change for the better in human beings that were feeling that frequency pulsate from outside of them to the inside of them. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's very interesting because I'd always presumed, because people say, oh, it's the Earth's frequency and it's coming from the Earth and everything like that, that it was emanating from inside of the Earth. So that sounds like, no, it's not. It's something being broadcasted onto the surface.
Right, and it sounds to me like perhaps the surface itself has a lot to do with it, and that may make sense why there can be so much destruction, such as something like a CERN beneath, so far under the earth, and yet the grass still grows and it's still very peaceful for the trees up above something like that. And if you believe in deep underground military bases, and if you believe the US is littered with those, that's why we still have very healthy parks. And both, from coast to coast in the US, we still have a fairly healthy vegetative, lifestyle around here in terms of farming, in terms of industry, in terms anything, everything in terms of that's been unaffected by the human touch is still doing pretty good, even if you have these deep, these DUMBs, deep underground military bases all over the place. So that would go far in explaining that, because I always thought, and it was always strange to me, that if they're doing like tests deep below the earth, or they're doing something that is military in nature, and this is me presuming, I'm speculating because I have no idea, but somehow that it would affect the surface as well. And oftentimes it doesn't seem to. And that may go far in explaining the Schumann resonance and that particular experiment that they were doing.
Yes, I like the only disruption that speculatively I've seen, speculatively, can't even
Yeah.
say that, was different incidences where people felt like explosions deep under the earth, like under their homes and where they were living and everything like that. And it's presume it's hard to say like there's testing of equipment down there, or if what would be causing shaking and booming and exploding to come from underneath, but it is
Mhm.
possible that something is going on down there where they're blowing things apart or fighting each other or testing equipment, or we've no idea what's going on down there.
Yeah, and, the cool thing is I've seen a lot of videos about that because I live near a very major military installation, and there's always ripples like that going on. There's always booms going on. Sometimes it sounds like there's a major fan, and it's all over the region, and it's going on. And I can tell you that, you certainly do feel the booms, and you certainly can literally feel them. And, I just presumed that's always what it was with military bases until I started seeing videos, and now it's starting to happen in kind of less militarized areas. And, I don't know how the military actually does this stuff or what it does because I'm not in the military and I've never been, but I just assumed they were doing exactly all of those things that you had just mentioned because to me that seems to be sort of the persona of the military is to do exactly those kinds of things, you know what I mean?
Yes, and it just, I mean, I knew there were certain ones that people had strongly speculated existed, like Denver Airport and those
Mhm.
kind of regions, but I didn't think that that kind of thing was going on just under people's homes in like random areas. So it's a different world under the surface for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and that to me, that was the eye opener, and one of the great tools about YouTube is that, to hear those booms that I'm used to hearing, and then it being in an area like a Denver airport, which you wouldn't associate at least I didn't until obviously a lot of us have probably looked into those videos about the Denver airport. I never associated it with being some sort of weirdo high-tech slash military slash I don't know what bunker, and to me, that always would seem like a civilian kind of area, or my favorite ones is where it's like, some random neighborhood and it's, you go and you find out where it's at and you go look on a map and there's no military base anywhere nearby. And you hear like this grinding kind of sound come from the sky and you're like, okay, well, that's not military, I don't think, unless, yes, it is coming from underground. And certainly that would be something very interesting if someone had the equipment to test the Schumann resonance or maybe a localized testing of the frequencies around there when those explosions or booms happen away from a military base to see if that affects things around there because one thing I learned from the video is that human beings are certainly when frequencies are when they're extracted from that human being and they're kind of put into isolation, ultimately we're a lot like plants in that we wither and ultimately die. And I can see why it may be a concern that they're not mentioning for deep space exploration. It may not be. Sure, it may be. If you're a flat earther, I get why that. No, but let's just for just the sake of this argument, you could actually go to another planet. One of the limitations we may have is that we need to sort of create an artificial Schumann resonance or whatever kind of frequency that the Earth gives us. Because in a lot of ways, we could be like, part of the vegetation more so than we think we are, and that we slowly wilt and die once we're away from our home, our sort of, Mother Earth, so to speak.
That makes sense. I mean, obviously, like you just said, not taking the flat Earth approach just for the sake of the argument. It would make sense that if it's that integral to our well-being, that being away from it either too far underground or too far up above ground would actually cause possibly illness to us, or you said like emotional distress.
Yeah, and that's, certainly those trips to Mars could certainly that would explain why, because Mars may have its own form of a Schumann resonance that could either be too weak or the possibility could be that it's actually hostile to our Schumann resonance or to our internal frequency. It could be hostile to it. And that could be something that possibly they're contending with that they don't want to talk about because this obviously implies a lot of things that are again kind of religious in nature, that we are a part of this earth, and whether it's from a more traditional Western religious, or this actually would lean more towards the New Agey side, that we are one with Earth, we are one with our creation, and that we are just as much a part of the earth, and we are an inescapable part of this planet. And indeed, we can never truly actually leave this planet. Now, that obviously can be argued either way with the flat earth or the round earth, but indeed it would explain that we are truly not separated from the earth. We are truly like an oak tree that's fastened to the ground, and that our ideas of grandeur, of what we are, that we're actually bigger than what we are, is that perhaps we're just uprooted plants just rolling around and with an incredibly large ego.
That's definitely one way of looking at it for sure. I hadn't considered. Um, that makes me think that perhaps there's more to the 5G propositions than we have thought, because
Mm.
perhaps with the Schumann resonance, it doesn't seem to be increasing in frequency like we had thought. I see a lot of different sources coming out and saying the Schumann resonance is increasing in amplitude. It's getting louder and louder and louder. And certainly this week, it's been crazy. They said they haven't seen spikes in the Schumann resonance like this for many, many years.
Hmm.
I wonder if the effects that having a louder, more persistent Schumann resonance would have would be countered by this 5G network that they're putting down. They said isn't actually going to help the phones so much, but it will cause more scrambulation to us.
Hey, that's pretty profound what you just said. So you're saying you're thinking and I just want to make sure I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to understand what you just said. So you're thinking that perhaps the Schumann resonance is spiking to kind of counter-react what we're actually doing with this cell phone and all this noise, this frequency noise. And then is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that the 5G networks will be more aggressive signal wise than what we're dealing with right now. What we're dealing with right now, a lot of people are saying that the signals from the cell phones that we're using right now is killing bees and killing other parts of nature. You know, that we're not going to live very long without bees if they go extinct. It's going to be an issue for sure.
Yeah, without the bees, the whole thing, I mean, the whole pyramid collapses, and, literally, it's over with within, a crop season, it's all over without bees. That's kind of bizarre, but it's absolutely 100% true, and, I'm not one to always, be a friend of science, but it seems to be pretty much 100% out there that if the bees go, so do we eventually.
Yep. So the last thing we want to do is if we have made an artificial disruptive signal that's getting in the way of like the Schumann resonance and the natural signals and harmonics and vibrations of what we need and what this place needs to function properly, then it would make sense that the counter for that is the Schumann resonance is getting massively bigger, maybe to drown out that noise.
Interesting. So the planet itself knows that one of the species within the planet's sort of system is becoming more and more aggressive, and the planet itself, like antibodies, is trying to fight that off with frequencies, knowing that we're more or less just a frequency ourselves. And I say cymatics, but it's really just a handle to understand that we're sound and we're frequency, and all those things, and the movement of particles, and the dissipation and creation of particles, and all of those things centers around the actual the movement in the electromagnetic spectrum and how frequency works and all that. And could you imagine if the earth in its infinite wisdom, or God or whatever, knows that this is coming and this is on our minds, and that it's working to kind of counteract that, protect other life forms and other frequencies and other species, because we're by far the most destructive one on the planet. And I think regardless of you're a hardcore materialist or you're a traditional, Western religious person in the Christian tradition, we all can agree that we're a relatively negative force upon the earth. I would think.
Even though we've seen things kind of change, like with the Mandela effect, and people may not know this, but in certain areas, the destruction that we did was semi corrected, but it still doesn't make up for how insane things are getting. And I would agree that we are very sensitive to frequency and to music and to the tuning of music and things like that. And uh,
Mhm.
to me, anyway, it's very important. I've been looking at, why we change concert pitch and things like this. And on the surface that might not sound like a big thing, but if it affects everybody and everybody is in a sense dense vibration, then that affects the world that we are interacting with every day as well.
Yeah, and I mean, what do you know about that? I know that we changed the standard pitch right after World War II, and the assumption is the Germans that we took in knew that if we changed the pitch and the frequency, that it would have a more detrimental effect um, on our cellular structure and presumably on our DNA. And I'm assuming that the reason was that would be a more passive effect on the general population, as well as one where we're constantly in a state of fatigue. So therefore, it sort of acts as kind of the fluoride theory, where it's kind of either dumbing down or it's weighing down and yoking the masses. So they're more tired and they're less eager to kind of speak up or against the government. And that's my general take on that whole frequency change in terms of tone and history. What do you think?
I think so. I think it's like, you could say like audio fluoride or something like that. It's like, it's not
Ooh.
quite right. You don't like it very much. They're playing these radios all the time and they're playing the same songs all the time. Like wherever you go, music will be blasting out of people's cars, will be blasting out of stores, it's blasting out everywhere. And it's not the type of music that you need from the things that I've looked at when things are in the correct concert pitch and the certain correct types of music are played, it can be very healing. It can be very positive. I was looking the other day at, I have the link open here. Yeah. This guy took the Fibonacci sequence and made a musical piece out of it. And it's very nice to listen to. Like it's very harmonic to what we are. And if it's okay, I could drop that link in the comments for people to check out.
I'd love it. That'd be great. I'd love to check it out. I'm a big Fibonacci fan because I know that I can tell you that both the range of human emotions, as well as things like the stock market and things like in terms of there's been entire books that talk about the cycling based on Fibonacci and everything about Fibonacci and the human behavior and human emotion and mass and sort of a mass expression, whether it be war or a form of chaos or anything else, can be almost predicted through different kinds of the broader Fibonacci sequences, 55, 144, 233, those kinds of numbers. That's why I repeat those numbers on my Twitter handle. I'll sometimes send that out for people who know the power of Fibonacci and that everything, pretty much revolves around it. If we are a structure and a frequency, the variables that sort of hold up that structure are in the nodes of the Fibonacci sequence, if you want to look at it that way. That's how powerful the Fibonacci sequence is to pretty much every human endeavor, whether you want to know it or not. It's integral to everything you do, and it goes right down to how the bud of a plant is formed, right all the way to our DNA sequences and all the way to the chaining of the stars. It's all out there, and it's all Fibonacci.
Yep. And oh, I was going to say, it won't let me share it. So I emailed the link to you to put in the chat box.
Okay, cool. As soon as I get the email here, my stuff's been loading so slow lately. Oh my gosh. So I've been, you said you emailed it to me?
I did. I emailed it to you because it's doing this thing again where it's like, nope, you can't put any web addresses.
Oh, okay.
It never lets me share links. I don't know why. But
I know, right?
I know.
Here Fib music link. I got it. Awesome. Let me take the link and I'll paste it in there. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Oh, that looks lovely. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, and I encourage everyone, man, look into Fibonacci. It's really cool. And it lends itself to a obviously a creative force in our existence, because in order to make the machinery work, there were kind of our creator used a Fibonacci sequence. Now, whether or not what creator that is, I don't know, but certainly this lends itself to a grand architect. And I don't think that to argue that is chance is to me a bit ridiculous. It really is. It's absurd to think that chance is going to use a sequence that builds upon itself from the last number mathematically, and something like that, like a Jacob's ladder that builds upon itself like that, to me just seems absurd. But that's my personal opinion.
Me too. Like when you look at the structures of things, whether it's a seashell that's uh, in a coil that's getting bigger and bigger, or whether it's the
Mhm.
placement of leaves on a plant or anything like that, it just doesn't make sense for it to be a crazy accident.
I really should look into the time wave zero, and I should probably look into the mathematical properties of exactly how that was put together, and see if that was some bearing on Fibonacci to that, because that would be really cool to see if that logarithm was actually built around something close to Fibonacci, because a lot of things are.
For sure. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure, again, this is another case where there are white papers out there and they understand all of this and the effects of all of this. But I'm sure that there are things that are based on the sequence that we haven't even noticed yet. And I'm
Mhm.
sure that they know how to use it to heal people.
Yep, yep, exactly. So, kind of switching gears a little bit. One of our favorite topics here is retrocausality, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I started to watch a video that was sent to me about the adventures of Barron Trump. And this isn't a political conversation. This is simply a conversation about retrocausality. So, have you heard about that book first?
There's were they two different books? There was The Last President that was written in 1900, and then there was the one that had like the picture of Barron Trump in it, but I think that was from around 1900 as well, and he was like this time traveling boy.
Yes.
Yes, I've
So,
seen those.
So if you take retrocausality and you erase time, and this plays into what I talk about all the time. If you were to look at time as a loop rather than a linear um, structure, then something like this is absolutely possible where the present is affecting the past in a way. And if people were to use some sort of method that we're not privy to, this would easily explain retrocausality, and it would easily explain all of the Simpson references. And it would easily explain all of those things that just seem to be very quirky. And we call it time travel simply because we don't have the language to support something like this. But I think I watched a video on that, and I was aware of both books, and I was aware of those things. But what's interesting is that they're being popularized right now as we're in this particular time period, and I think to me it seems it smacks of retrocausality. And if you give up linear time and you give up sort of that idea that I've been talking or we've been talking about now for I don't know how many months or maybe even a year, it actually this plays into that retrocausality. That too as well lends itself to the Mandela effect, which itself could be just a spin-off or some sort of branch of retrocausality that we're only beginning to now understand.
Yeah, and it's oh, I can hear myself in your background.
Uh-oh, you can?
Yeah.
All right. Let me see here. All right, how about now?
Um, no, now it's good.
Now we're good?
Awesome.
Okay. All right, awesome. So, yeah, what do you think?
Well, I had always thought that it was something that could have been disrupted by machine, and some might say that that's like, how one would approach it, coming from more of a third dimensional area where you're not dealing with time in a superposition form, but rather as a linear form. And because I looked at Tesla's experiments and things like that, the Philadelphia experiment, all these different things about how they had manipulated time or done to different timelines. Al Biblick, all of that. I've looked into all these different things, and I've seen that people ended up in different outcomes, different timelines. They never went from one end of where they were linearly to a different point in their linear timeline. They would leave where they were linearly and end up somewhere else where different things had happened, which I didn't really understand. But then when I started to see the Mandela effect, I saw like, oh, there are many, many outcomes, and sometimes they even intersect with each other, which is more of a fourth dimensional thing, which I'm only just starting to understand, because I had taken it just very literally that fourth dimensional existence just meant that time was being added to the structure. But now I'm seeing, no, it's the point where linear time is no longer where linear time is basically obsolete, and you exist in more of a superposition format where it's not following that, like where the past can affect the future can rewrite the past, and different things from different parts of different timelines can intersect with your reality. You're not just staying in your own lane on the highway, so to speak. You're branching off into different lanes. And anyways, going back to Tesla, they had used electromagnetism. They had used electricity in an offset pulse to be able to basically disrupt, if you will, the fabric of time, but they didn't quite crack it. And anyone that's looked into the Philadelphia experiment will see that that was kind of an issue, because they had found a way, and I'm sure there's far more complex parts of that were never made public. They found a way to disrupt time as we see it, linear time. But then when the atoms all rejoined and basically the ship reappeared, it rejoined randomly. So people were fused into the boat, or they had come apart into different parts, and it was quite the disaster. And what we're seeing now is we're not in an area of life where we're dealing with that. We're not. I don't think that they're using machines to time travel at this point in time. I think it is whatever's happened to us since then. People who have never touched a time machine now are living in more of a fourth dimensional existence, where we're seeing different parts of time affect different parts of time.
I like that. I like that a lot, because that's, like these books and all the strange coincidences that we're all seeing, and the Mandela effect and all of those, and the Bible changes. It truly is a point where we used to take for granted that the present, meaning the moment that we're all experiencing, that's what's actually in control, and that it will determine the future, and that it was beholden to the past. And what we're all starting to see is that these illusions of all three of those parts are now on equal footing, and that all we need now is to be able to somehow perceive one another, the past, the present, and the future. And if we can somehow, and maybe perhaps some people have already done this, and that's why we're seeing something like the last president or Barron Trump, that those breakthroughs perhaps are becoming natural or dissolving or whatever it may be. And as this happens, they no longer have to be in that sequence where the center of the universe used to be the present,
Yeah, like in a fourth dimensional space, there's no reason why the Trumps getting elected in 2016 wouldn't rewrite the past 100 years before that, because the past and the future are like mirrors facing each other now, and the information is just bouncing back and forth through the present.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I believe that. And then whenever you kind of layer all of that with the possibility of there being more than one versions of the present and more than one version of reality, then things get incredibly interesting with those possibilities, because that itself then isn't so far-fetched. And you could be looking at the possibility of multiple outcomes in the past, multiple outcomes in the future, and multiple versions of the present. And a lot, you and I spoke about this before, is where people were hearing and even claiming that they not only were not only feeling the rattling of Armageddon or a world war, but were actually remembering parts of it. I myself think that things changed, myself personally, as I believe you do too. I don't think that we're in the same place, and I don't think you do as well. And didn't you remember something like what was your experience again?
You mean how crazy things were getting just before I changed
Yeah,
timelines?
but before you changed your timeline, yeah, because my timeline I've told before, but your timeline was things were going really sideways.
Things were going really south really quickly, and everybody was quite concerned that there was going to be World War III. Even people who are not particularly empathetic or, have sensitivity to surroundings around them, the air was just like thick with this like um, not even anxiety, but just this like tension, like something really bad is going to happen. And when I saw that the everyday person was feeling that, that made me even more anxious about it. And then, not just the palpable worry in the air that something was about to happen, but what we were seeing was this was before Trump had been elected and Obama was still in. There was issues with Russia, sorry to say, because now we're talking about Russia again here in this timeline. But at that point in time where I was, Castro was still alive. Putin had come to visit Cuba, and they were looking at these old USSR. I know they were technically not the USSR, but communist missile silos, and they reopened the silos just in spite of the United States complaining and heavily and saying you can't do that. And they did it anyway, and they did it very publicly. It was all over the newspapers. And at that same time, we had submarines off the coasts of the United States, and it was, everybody was kind of on edge with the submarines being there. And then at a certain point, the submarine started firing over the LA coast, but things they fired never came down and hit us. It just stayed up in the air. And CNN was trying to say that it was UFOs, which was ridiculous. Even the people who loved UFOs just didn't go with that cover story. But Don Lemon was trying to tell everyone, oh, it's those lights there in the sky, that's an unidentified flying object. Who knows? It could be UFOs. And they're pulling out all this ridiculous stuff. And we didn't know. We didn't know if it was some kind of special missile that was going to land on us later. We didn't know what the heck was going on. It was very much headed towards a bad situation. And then that very last day was actually, for me on that timeline, was the day of the election. Even though I didn't fully pick up on the changes until after that. But I remember that night, the traffic lights were still green on top. We drove my friend to the airport to go home because she had stayed with me for a little while. Hillary was winning, like just state after state after state. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. That's a done deal. I'm not going to stay up much later to watch it. I went to bed. Everything changed when I woke up the next day. The election had gone the other way. The traffic lights were upside down. Every country on the world map was different. Castro had died. Castro was not still alive. Putin was not in Cuba. The submarines were not off the coast. Denmark was where it was when I had my time slip in 2008. And I was just like, oh, okay, I'm back here, this place where the map of Europe is all crazy. Because, like I said, I'd seen that place once before when I had this weird, like, Mandela effect time slip in 2008. And then I ended up back in my original timeline. So I figured I would end up back in my original timeline. So I was kind of worried about it. I was like, I don't want to get too involved here because I don't know if I'm staying wherever this is very long. But I never went back to my original timeline. I have been there since the election. I've been on this, whatever this Orion timeline is, because they used to refer to where I was before as Sagittarius arm, but this is the Orion arm. So I have no idea how that works either in relation to time travel, why there would be different arms, unless it's a different outcome, that Earth formed on a different arm. And those outcomes are just intersecting. All those possibilities and variables are just playing alongside instead of being one or the other. We have all the possible outcomes of where Earth could have formed.
That's great. See, I wish I would have been. I think I wish I say that's great that your first shift. I've been very vigilant about my shifts since I've paid attention to the Mandela effect around 2016. But the problem is, before that, I was aware of the shifts, but I didn't have any language to it, and I just thought that's how the world went, and that I had a bad memory, and that things were just always incredibly different from my relatives, our history, or people that were around me or whatever. And I didn't know that these were, there was a term for it, and there was these great changes that I used to argue with people about the past and our shared past, that it was completely different, and that maps were changing, and I simply just didn't have those tools, those language tools, to communicate to people exactly what was happening, or to make sense in my own mind that things were happening. And I wish I would have been more um, open and vigilant about those things. And then I could have probably had a more, I would have been able to express things more early on. But unfortunately, it was around 2016 whenever I started to really gain an understanding of exactly how reality works and exactly how time works, and that it's nothing like, if you are passive in your life and you accept everything that everyone tells you about how the world exactly works, that you will be a passenger in your own life, and you will be passive in your own life, and you truly will have no control over it. Versus if you were to kind of take control of your own life in a way that it starts off just by you making simple observations and making your own mind up, in absolute difference to what they told you. It's then that you begin that process that we're talking about, and you get to the point where you and I are, where we just accept shifts. We just accept that, and if you do that, then you can develop the language and you can develop the skills to actually talk about things like the past, the present, and the future, absolutely interacting with one another on a regular basis, and that it's not that big a deal, and that there were different outcomes, and that there are different versions of reality, and sometimes they coexist peacefully and sometimes they don't coexist peacefully. And I truly believe there are times where our idea of war and what war is could be possibly a tinkering unnaturally from other dimensions or other versions of reality, trying to, like right now, we openly admit different outfits like CERN are openly admitting with the quantum computing that they're trying to mine resources from another dimension. Perhaps that other dimension doesn't want the resources mined. Perhaps that could cause a disruption, sort of like fracking, and its relation to why Oklahoma has 35 earthquakes. Or I'm in a different timeline now where Oklahoma having earthquakes is quite the norm, and to me, that was kind of rare before, so I don't know.
Yeah, I thought Oklahoma used to get twisters and hurricanes rather than earthquakes.
Yeah, it's like earthquake central now. It's like all over the place. Yeah, all the plains that used to be twister central. It's absolutely. And then the East Coast, especially the Southeast, which used to sweat hurricanes and get hit almost every year. They haven't been really bombarded, but I don't know. I don't know. It's very strange.
It is really strange. One of the stranger ones as well is that on Orion Arm, the day they had September 11th, they had a hurricane come in and hit New York. Like it came up off the coast, and then on Sagittarius Arm that didn't happen at all.
Oh,
It was
wow.
weird to see the difference of outcomes on that. Like on Sagittarius Arm, as far as the Pentagon went, they were doing renovations that day and nobody was in. So when it got hit, nobody was hurt. And then on Orion Arm, everybody was in work. And I think it was like 116 people died.
Now, how about this as an idea? Do you think maybe like mass events that cause a focusing of emotion, perhaps they could be the way in which different either timelines or different, the past, present, or future could possibly um, communicate with one another? That's why war is so incredibly important, because that causes a real density to the frequency. And by getting so far down in density, you could perhaps erase the walls of the past, the present, and the future, and that's where a particular communication can happen. because, as you know, it's much easier to go negative and get more dense in the atmosphere, and that's conducive to this area in this world of matter, in this existence of mass. If you believe in the fall, where humanity was in a more celestial state, in a fall into matter, whether it was literal or whether it was some kind of allegory, you know, the way in which we communicate in a more dense area usually is by expression of violence, and that's the way things change, is violence or implied violence. Now, if you take that and you magnify that, that's a way in which to create a change on a whole different level and a whole different scale, and that's to make the past more subservient to the present, or maybe the past makes the present more subservient to it, or back and forth, perhaps.
It is. I'm wondering about that, and about the way that emotions play into this whole thing. Because, like we were talking about earlier, about being vibration and frequency, um, how the frequencies we emit may change or interfere with different timelines, with different realities intersecting with us, with different outcomes, and it's very complicated. Dark Wolf's Den is looking into that. He's got the emotions theory, and I'm looking at a different aspect of the emotions theory, wherein if we look at the world like a grid, so to speak, I'm looking at the vile vortexes that we were talking about last time as
Hmm.
possibly being junction points on this grid for where this energy could be emanating up into our reality. And what Dark Wolf Sen was saying is that when our emotions get overboard, like when the palpable, when that's in the air, when it's thick like that in the air, that's when it reaches a certain breaking point and the timelines shift.
That's interesting. But playing on that, if you think about it, when we think of history or we think of our history books, really it's just riddled with points of violence and war and really awful things. We talk about plagues and war and all of these things, and all of those things have a reaction where it kind of shuttles us forward into a different kind of thinking. It forces us to go a different route. Now, if you were to systematize that and organize that, and you were to organize a collective, amount of pain or a collective amount of suffering and kind of bottle it and kind of to kind of use that to kind of as a way in which to move things in a direction, then possibly you could actually change the world.
Yeah, if we understood more about how it works and how what the parameters are of it, um, it could change everything.
Okay, everybody, I'm sorry. It's almost an hour anyway. I'm on call for my job, and I just got paged, and I'm so sorry. I've been on call for 3 days. I've been up at 3 a.m. every single night, and I got to cut this short because I just got paged again. If you guys heard that, that was my pager. Actually, it was my phone, but it's not a pager. But anyway, there's been a system failure again, and I have to take that. So I do apologize. But we were close to an hour, and I think, Chick, I would say we made some pretty good strides here today. What do you think?
I hope so, and I hope that, yes, we did make some good strides. I'm just saying, I hope that we, um, as a group, as the Mandela Effect group, can crack the codes of these different things and find out how to make things better as we go along.
I think we get closer every week. All right, everybody. Well, it's we're coming up on 45 minutes. We're going to cut it 15 short because I got to do my thing that pays my rent. And we will check you guys out next week. Same time, same place, Lost and Found Bin, episode 14. And we'll continue in this vein. And any last words, Chick?
Just thank you, everyone, for coming out today, and I look forward to talking on the next Lost and Found bin.
And it's only been 45 minutes, but it's felt like 2 minutes. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.